We are live.
All right.
Well, that was a great intro.
Best
Best intro I've ever seen.
one.
It's Friday the 13th, guys.
I see that. It's as wow.
You're now watching two old farts making noises.
Hey, welcome to the remote show with Michael Maturo. Oh, we missed the girl with the porn.
The the voiceover.
Yeah,
Different
she-
voiceover, different look.
she was also a victim of Friday the 13th. So she disappeared somewhere, and because unfortunately some rather large Chinese organization didn't like the original fantastic music that I did for the show for you, Michael. And so
music, yeah.
So we had to add some new music, and of course the interesting lady and the typing disappeared with that. So
Okay. So we lost the
somewhere in the
got new
universe on a
visuals.
hard disk, it's somewhere, but I haven't found it yet.
That's funny.
somewhere in the ether.
I need remote support. That's what I need, Michael.
Hey, it's a good thing that this show's all about remote work because maybe
Remote
we'll
work,
get some remote
right.
support. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, good to see you, gentlemen. Stephen,
See you.
David. Good
Yeah.
to see you once again. So we've got two
Thank
big
you.
topics today. We've got women in tech. So women in the tech industry. I'll give you a little bit of history of that, and then a little bit of what's going on today, and then we'll dive into a little bit of meeting culture and how that actually relates to women in tech. But speaking of women in tech, next week, no, not next week, the week after, on the 20, I guess that's the 27th, Brittany Hodak from Creating Superfans will be on the show talking about creating superfans in a remote work environment.
Ooh,
So we're going to have a guest on the show, first one.
very exciting.
Yeah. So I worked with Brittany at experience.com, and that's how I met her, became good friends, and have stayed in touch after she moved on to writing this book and now being on the circuit to promote this book. And it's all about creating people who are super fans of your company, of your product, of your service. And we'll talk about how that relates to remote work, because you almost have to, you want super fans in the remote work space. You want people to be super fans of you as your colleagues, even though you're in a remote environment, and maybe especially because you're in a remote environment.
Very cool.
Yeah, I must admit, Mike, I'm slightly confused by that terminology, super fan. I did think it was something to do. I mean, forgive my ignorance as ever. I did think it was something to do with being a rock star or something, or a famous actor, but that's not. It's obviously it isn't. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Because it's a new one for me.
Yeah. Super fandom. I mean, it does actually come from the rock space, from the celebrity space, because there are people who are fans who obsess over the product, and you probably see this with Apple. There are plenty of Apple people. I'm kind of one of them, where they know all about the products, they know all about the company, they know all about the people, and they talk about the product, they talk about Apple, or they talk about the celebrity without any payment or any sort of gain from the company itself. So they're volunteering their time and energy to champion whatever the product or service is.
Wow.
So, David, what are you a super fan of?
I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, I'm quite taken aback by that. You know, it's my first thought was, oh, that sounds very American, but
She is American.
I don't know.
She is American.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate that, but just I'm a super fan of apples. Well, I'm a super fan of pears, but to be a super fan of a particular product, that's maybe I'm just a bit too got too much dust in my head.
Maybe it is an American thing. I mean, that's worth talking. I know that we have an international audience for this show, so that there probably is a cultural difference. But in any case, if you're a company, you want to create people who really like your product, right? So whether we're calling it superfans or not, there are people who we're creating people who really want to support the company. And
it's a strange thing, Michael, because I would have walked past it. You know, I would have seen it in a bookstore, and I would have thought that's not for me. It's going to be about something. So, I'd be interested when I sort of want to, pour cold water onto this week's show. But it'll be interesting to have her
pour cold water on her show.
Yeah, listen, I mean, it sounds like all we want to talk about is a super fan thing, which is because it's your guest, and we want to leave it up to her. So.
If we're lucky enough, maybe she'll send us a book, David, and we can each read about it before she comes on the show. And then you'll know all about it.
If it's got big letters and lots of drawings in it, I should be okay.
It's got lots of pictures, David, of super fans, AC/DC, Aerosmith, big fans. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. For you, it would be Chaplin, Buster Keaton, those guys. When you would go to the movies, before the time.
Of course, my other reaction was that it was something to do with some sort of air conditioning, but that's obviously not. That's I mean, it's more says more about the way that my brain works. But seriously, Michael, I would have. If I'd have seen that stacked up in a bookstore, it would not have screamed out to me because I have no idea what that means. But I must admit, I would be fascinated to read the book. Very, because I can see why somebody wrote a book about it, because it's quite a strange phenomenon. But so I'd be interested in it as regards that.
It's a new phenomenon in a way. It is a new phenomenon in a way, but this whole explosion of customer experience and companies focusing on the customer and making sure that the customer has everything that they need in the buying process. They make sure the customer actually has excitement about the product and knows everything about it. I mean, that is a relatively new craze.
I beg to differ, and here's why. Because in the 60s and 70s, customers were always right, and customer service was everything. It became in like the late 80s and the 90s and the 2000s where all of a sudden the customer was just a piece of shit. Nobody gave a crap. Wow. So I think it's a resurgence, and I know everybody's going to hate this, but I'm going to love it, of the old school mentality that companies that we own and companies that we invest in, that we instill in every day. Because when I was a kid, I remember that if you asked somebody to do something at these customer people, they would do it, within reason, of course. But like certain hotels, like the Four Seasons or whatnot, that's all they pride themselves on for the last 50 years. So I think this super fan thing's also been around, where people will, like, if they like to back in, when muscle cars, they'd be like, look at my Camaro or look at my Ford, whatever it was. Yeah. So I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's a resurgence of it. I think it's under a different light because of the way things are done today, where, you call an 800 number, you don't speak to a person. I speak 25 minutes to a computer, then I finally get to a person, where they literally wasted now 25 minutes of my life. So when I get to the person, I'm pissed off. It would be better for them to go back to the old customer service where someone goes, hello, and like one of the banks we deal with, if there's a long wait on the 800 number, we'll call you back. Okay. You're not wasting my time. And I think companies today don't value their customer for all the bullshit they put out there. And we love you and we know you don't, because if you did, you would get rid of all this crap that it makes us annoyed, and you'd have, we'll call you back. Let's talk to a person. Or if I say, I don't want to talk to you, Mr. Computer, get me to a person. Stop asking me the 27 questions you need. Let me talk to a person, because there's a reason I want to talk to a person. And I think that's a big problem in today's companies. And they have all these remote workers. So what happens if the remote worker has to spend an extra 30 seconds with me? I like your company more because you show that you care. That's so right. I have a real issue with the way it's done today. I'd rather speak to a person, not a machine.
Until AI gets really, really good at it.
Right. And then even then, I don't know if it's ever going to be that good.
I don't know that it's ever going to have the same. It's not going to.
But can I ask, Michael, Superfan, would that be if I was having some sort of sales training or support training. Is there a terminology that would be used then?
I think it's a kind of a new the word itself, super fan.
Right.
That's the first time I've really heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
In
think
business,
she's
'cause-
coining a new phrase for an old concept.
Right. I think in business, it's a new phrase. If super fans have been around since rock and roll.
Right.
Like Beatlemania had super
Yeah,
fans and
yeah.
all that, right? Movie stars have had super fans, but in business, and I would even say businesses had super fans. Like, when the Plymouth had their Charger with the Roadrunner emblem, they had super fans. The Corvette community has super fans.
Mhm.
But I think now you're getting into like Apple has super
Apple
fans.
Computer has
Yeah.
had Mac fans from the beginning.
Yep.
And they of all ecosystems, they do it really well. I mean, there aren't even that many Apple computers out there. There's a lot more iPhones than Apple
Right.
computers, and yet you hear about the computers all the time because there's such a fandom behind it.
Yeah. It's wild. I
Wild.
any company that treats me like a person,
And that's the exception.
bank, whatever, then I'm a fan of that company and I will praise it to whatever. But the minute I get stuck into that AI crap and I get to that person, I'm like, you've wasted my time. You're wasting more of my time. Get me going. Like I'm with T-Mobile. I like T-Mobile. The little guy will go, booga, booga, booga. What can I help you with? I need to speak to a customer service rep. And T-Mobile's AI goes, no problem. I get over there and they go, hey, Steven, it's 25 minutes. We'll call you back. Boom, done. I like that. T-Mobile does not waste my time.
Yeah.
I can go through 50 other companies when I call, they waste your time. And I'm like, why? Why can't you just
Here's a bombshell for you then, Stephen. Is it a customer service because it's a German company?
Oh, the Nazis run it
T-Mobile?
efficiently. That's true. Yeah. I love the Nazis.
No, I didn't.
gotta like them for
That's
something.
not. I didn't say that.
They're not Nazis?
And-
Well, they are German. And there were Nazis in Germany. I'm just saying. Too soon? Is it too soon? Seriously?
I'm sure when you get that letter on your Mac tomorrow morning from the legal department of T-Mobile America, they'll have a different point of view on that. But
All right.
yeah,
T-Mobile America, not Nazis. Okay. We feel better. They're owned by SoftBank, which makes them Japanese. So there you go. So do we feel better now? So there you have it. So, you can grab this right here.
I just wonder if that's very much, Germans are very service orientated. Which you can't say about the Dutch where I live, because I mean, that really is an oxymoron.
No.
Yeah, I think maybe it is, but I remember when not the CEO now, but the other CEO of T-Mobile, and I've been with T-Mobile for like 20 years. Like I was like the day they got here, I went to T-Mobile.
Yeah.
And I will say this, from the very first interaction I've ever had with them to any interaction, I love them, because when I had a problem because the antenna wasn't right in our neighborhood, I called them, and the next day there were like 3 vice presidents and 7 engineers in the neighborhood in our house. Everybody's fixing like the antenna perfectly. And to this day, every time I call, they still are like that. So where I make a joke about, whatever, too bad, get a pair of balls, I don't give a shit. But T-Mobile, as a customer service oriented company, bends over backwards. And when people go, who do I use? I'm a super fan. I will also tell you, it's the only mobile company that I've used globally that I get service in every country, no matter where. And we used to do a lot of business in Bolivia and Colombia. Which wasn't true, but we did. But not illegal. It was all legal. And when we would land, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, none of them would work. And all my buddies that were with me would go, can I use your phone to call or text my wife to tell her I'm alive? And I finally said to them, get with T-Mobile, because it's only going to happen this one time. So their international coverage, the best. Wow. Their international plans, everything that T-Mobile does, they're not sponsoring us, by the way, is the best. That they are the best, in my opinion, and the experiences I've had. They have the best customer service, bar none, and they have the best service, bar none. And so for superfan, that would be.
Sounds like a superfan to me.
I was just going to say, let's rewind the show. Forget me not understanding what a superfan is. I've just
he's got it.
He's just gone off. He's just gone off on one about T-Mobile. So yeah.
See, listen, I make a joke anytime somebody says German about Nazis, but T-Mobile, all bullshit aside, And regardless
Does
what
it,
they
does it
did with
give
SoftBank,
the
or whatever,
thing
that's
is
it.
the thing is, Stephen, does it give you an erection? That's the most important thing.
Well, only if I take the blue pill. But no, I mean,
Okay.
I love T-Mobile is just one of those companies that I get when someone says, who should I live? I've never had a bad thing. And I've been with them, I want to say 22 years. And I've never had a bad, and I'm going to say this now, of course, tomorrow something will go wrong and I'll get pissed off. But I've never had in 22 years with T-Mobile a bad experience, ever.
Yeah.
If there's a discrepancy, a bill, whatever it might be, they rectify it immediately. And if you say, listen, I want to speak to someone higher, they get you someone higher. But I also like when they answer the phone, it'll be like, hi, I'm Debbie, I'm Bruce, I'm whatever. I'm from Oklahoma. They'll tell you where they're from, and they make it that you're not just getting somebody, and no disrespect to the people that have call centers in the Philippines and India and all this other, but I'm not getting, may I get you a Slippy, please, sir? And they don't understand what I'm saying. I don't care what they're saying because they're not actually helping. I'm getting someone who really is helping me. And if I go to one of the T-Mobile stores, their customer service is the same. Yeah.
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 So that's.
Well, I'm so glad we hijacked your show about.
Sorry about that, Michael.
Tech coming in now.
Yeah.
T-Mobile will be a sponsor next week, everybody.
Next week, yeah.
Women in tech, that's where we were supposed to be.
Well, it's a good shift to it because it turns out women in tech do not have a good experience in the tech industry. And this is something that's only been happening since the 70s. So a little bit of history is actually the first computer programmer who programmed, everybody seems to know Charles Babbage, who made the first general purpose computer. And that was in the 1800s. But Ada Lovelace, a countess at the time, was actually the first person to see that computer, that Babbage computer, and then program it. She created an algorithm for that machine, for that early computer. And that actually led to a whole history of women in computing. So Margaret Hamilton led the MIT team to program for the Apollo mission in the 60s. So for a long time, and this includes during the war period, World War II, when computers were just getting started and men were on the battlefield, and it was women who were programming these machines. So they say until the 70s, women were actually making up the bulk of the tech workforce, which when you look at the workforce now, there's only 25% of women of the workforce is women. So it's shifted a lot in those 50 years.
No, and it's interesting because there's an article yesterday in the Financial Times that in South Korea, women are having a tough time breaking into the tech industry because it's all male dominated.
Totally male dominated.
So and even in the States, I think it's tough. But I also think it's the company, like companies that are smart to hire and promote based on ability, not gender.
That's right. Well, there was a study in Computer World that said when you do a blind look at somebody's code,
right.
When they take out the gender, when you don't know the gender of the person writing the code, women actually seem to perform better in their programming abilities than men. So when you look at the meritocracy, we need to emphasize the gender parity in the tech industry and elevate them. And this goes into how do I as a man in the tech industry do that? And that's kind of what I wanted to address too, is talk about how you look at computer science majors in the 80s, 37% of them were women, and now it's only 20%.
Wow.
So you're losing, you have this whole brain drain, and you're losing an entire perspective. The way I view it is you're losing the perspective of women in tech. And that's making tech companies not all of them, but that's making tech companies lopsided in a male-dominated environment, which doesn't always lead to better profits.
Unless you're running Yahoo, unless you're running Yahoo and you're female, apparently not doing a really good job. So,
it's interesting, Michael, that you said about doing it blind, because I would listen to a report, I think a couple of 3 weeks ago, I was watching on the BBC, and there was a company in Wales who had this terrible problem of getting programmers because there's an acute shortage. And they had decided, they'd also stumbled upon this as well, and they decided just to say to people, solve this puzzle or whatever they had to do. They didn't want to know. They gave people a number, I think, and just said, this is a test. You have to pass it. And lo and behold, all these young girls kept popping up.
Yep.
And so they took on a whole load of people. And they said themselves, well, we probably wouldn't have looked, or we probably would have been slightly frightened about taking people on, they're going to be pregnant within 2 or 3 years and we have to pay maternity leave, etc. Whereas the other people were saying, well, look, these people, these ladies can seriously code, so let's take them on now while we can.
Yeah. And they have, women-led organizations, even though they seem to make more profit, and there aren't that many women-led tech organizations as it is, but supposedly they're only getting 2% of venture capital funding, women-led organizations. So there's obviously a huge negative bias against women. And I don't know much of it. Of course, I don't know any of it directly, but I know it from colleagues in the past. And women face sexual harassment, and it could be even as simple as men talking over women, which is something that we need as a culture, as a tech culture, need to think about. So I wanted to acknowledge that, because we're men on this show, but in the tech industry, it's male dominated and it's problematic. It's problematic on a lot of levels.
Well, somebody's pussy's meowing, by the way. Just with not all women on the show, apparently, or all men on the show. And the other thing, though, I think it's very cool that your first guest is going to be a woman. Yeah,
exactly.
So I think that's very
cool. Who worked
at
a tech company. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be a very, very, very cool thing, which is going to be the 21st.
She'll be on the 27th, actually.
27th. Sorry about that.
So, yeah.
2 weeks. Very good.
Yeah, that'll be great. So that's kind of a segue into meeting culture. The segue being not talking over colleagues in general, but you tend to see that men will jockey in a meeting for the microphone, and women would maybe back off and not do that, not participate in that. So when you're holding meetings, when we talk about meeting culture, it's not just figuring out the logistics of the meeting, the agenda of the meeting, who should be in the meeting, but it's also, are we giving everybody, especially the women in tech, are we giving everybody a voice in that meeting? Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of having that person on the call? And you
have a lot of meetings where it's just literally turns into a dick measuring meeting, and women, are totally excluded from all these, I can do this, I can do that, and I very often talk to a lot of very successful women that I have around me in my life, and they all say the same thing. Yeah, it's all about who's the biggest, the best, the strongest. Mm-hmm. And while all that's happening, the actual the essence of what that meeting is about, or the problem that needs to be solved, never really gets to, because it's all one-upmanship.
Right.
And, a lot of women find that really, they tiresome, I think, is probably the best way that they describe it. Shut up, guys. There's a problem. Let's solve it. We're not worried about who's got the biggest dick here. Come on, let's do it.
Let's get it done.
Yeah.
And so, lots of people have written about what we're talking about, the toxic, not just people toxic. I'm talking about not toxic masculinity, but I'm talking about toxic cultures in the tech world. And lots of people have written about that. And it's important that I think as a tech worker myself, it's important to think about, because actually at experience.com, we have two of our heads of engineering and our head of product are both women, and they're fantastic. So I don't really think it's an issue of merit and ability. It does come down to people's approach to how you treat women in the organization. So
but that may be a DNA thing of the company too, because I know
sure
I'm very much, we're going to treat everybody equally. So I don't care, color, sexual orientation, and or sex. And today I could pick one. I don't care. Everyone's the same until they're not. So, because I usually say, like, to the interns, just because you're an intern doesn't mean you can't speak or have an idea. And sometimes
Right.
they'll think their idea is the dumbest idea, and their ideas are usually the best ideas because they don't have a clue. They're like, what about this? And everyone's like, oh, I wish I thought of that, you know? So I think it's company culture. I think from the top down, if you're like, we want to hear your ideas and you speak. But if you got guys that are trying to always show that they have the biggest in the room,
Yeah.
then those are the guys who usually don't and have come to the meeting. I'd rather have
Right. And
people
having fun.
that are going to actually get things done and just tell me, instead of telling me how wonderful you are for an hour, I just
Right.
need 15 minutes to tell me how you're going to get it done, and then go do it.
hmm
So
And that goes into the concept, the meeting culture idea, and how you run a meeting and who you bring to it are all.
right.
I sent you that article on some tips. It was tips on remote work that I found from that I found on LinkedIn. But
Right.
they brought up a good point is, and then we've talked about this before, could the meeting itself, because in a remote organization, you're having all of you fill your calendar with Zoom meetings,
Right.
and people are trying to just meet sometimes for no particular reason without an agenda, which is a problem in itself. But even if you have the agenda, the question is, could the meeting be an email? Could it be a direct Slack message? Could it be a shared document that everybody reviews asynchronously? So even questioning whether you need to have the meeting, I think is a really important point for people, especially in the remote world, because what I've seen at every remote organization that I've been at, people tend to want to overmeet
Mm.
instead of be very focused in what those communications are.
Well, and I think part of that is because if we're all in the same building and I want to have a meeting with you and David, I can't be like, let's grab lunch, like make a working
Right,
lunch out of it, right?
right,
I
right,
can't sit
right.
there so I have got to do a Zoom. I can have a working Zoom lunch, but so they're like, okay. And they also want everybody, I think, to feel connected. So it's like, okay, let's have 737 meetings and let's talk about everything. Like the water cooler doesn't work, right? But it's at your house. We don't really care. I mean, it's one of those, you know what I mean? And I think it's over meet now instead of who do I really need to meet with? And then it really also, I think, depends on the employees. Like if I need something over the weekend or late at night or early in the morning, I have no problem texting or calling, right?
Right,
Like
right.
I don't need to have a meeting. But a
Yeah.
lot of these companies, I think in France, you can't email people after 5 o'clock. There's this whole
Mm,
thing. And what's happening is, I mean, we've talked about this, a couple of years ago when all the intern or not the new hires from Goldman came, they complained about their work week, so they had to
right.
cut it down. And I think it's like this, you can't work us like that. And I don't think people realize what it really takes to build or run a company. You know what I mean? It's like I get
Right.
hired at Apple.
Especially at
They're a
that
gazillion
scale.
dollar company. It doesn't matter if I'm the lowest employee in customer service or I'm Tim Cook.
Yeah,
There you have to do certain things to make us $1 trillion company.
that's right.
And I don't think a lot of employees understand that because it goes back to mommy told them they were special and they came in 300th. And that's not the world. And then they wonder why the Chinese beat them, the Koreans beat
Mm.
them, the Japanese beat them, and the list goes on and on and on, and they don't get it. They don't understand because there's not that, it has to be ingrained. And I
Well,
think that's part of it too.
that's why people listen to the show, because they're getting
Right.
these tips. Because if you do look at yourself as somebody who wants to excel, regardless of what your position is, regardless of your title, you can be a part of a much bigger company. You can be a part of a company that's going to actually perform well and set yourself apart. I mean, that's it's even more important in a remote environment to set yourself apart by doing your best to be exceptional. You don't want to just, I guess, I mean, we always say in our household, only dead fish go with the flow. You want to you want to actually be part of shaping that flow and figuring out what's going on in the company. How do you participate in the mission of the company is an important question for a remote worker, for any worker, and I think it's something that people of all ages need
Right.
to be thinking about.
But you also have to stand out. So, like in my world, first in, last out type of thing, right? If you
Yeah,
you have to be the first. You have to do. So, I'm assuming in remote work, you can log in early, you can
yeah,
do extra, you can do a little bit over the weekend.
a little bit.
People
Yeah,
notice that extra oomph,
that's right.
and that gets you to the next level. If you're just literally a 9 to 5er and you
It's
complain that
obvious.
you're right, you're not making any money, you're not getting this, you're not getting that, you hate your boss. Either A, shut the you know what up and quit your job, go find another one, or B, you make it that you're so invaluable that if you quit, they're not going to let you. And
Right.
I think that's a lot of it. Like I hear people go, I don't like my job. I don't get paid. I'm like, then quit and find another job, or go for the next quarter, just give them 10,000 more percent and say,
See where
and
it
then if
goes.
they don't give you what you want, then go look for a gig, but they can never say anything bad about you because then you exploded and they're going to be like, oh, what happened here?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean,
but
I feel like it's, so then the question is how much extra effort, or part of the question is how much extra effort do you need to do to stand out? And it depends at each company. But I think
Right.
the bigger question is not how much effort you make, but how creative can you be in your role to really think, where can I add value? Because I think what we see in the remote work, and especially in the startup world, I mean, I generally work in the startup world. You have to think creatively about where you can fit and where you can contribute. We're going through a major project to identify all the executive sponsors, for example, at our customers, and my team jumped in to help that effort, even though it's outside of the realm of what we typically do. It's a high value activity that we can put our names on and be a part of, and it's an easy way to do that.
Right. Yeah, but see, if you don't teach people that, they don't know that. And that's really kind of pathetic. And I think part of it's where you grow up and what your parents are like and grandparents and yada, 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 and the people you hang out with.
Yeah.
And part of it's where you go to school and university. But people don't get that. People literally think they're entitled to stuff. And I think that you have to either have it or not.
Not everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to leave room for the fact that there are people who are carrying the torch in the right way, carrying the torch
Right.
for the working world in the right way, and are not embracing this culture of entitlement and give me
Those are not the ones we're speaking about, though, because if those are the ones that don't need your course, the ones that need your course are the ones that are the mamby-pambies crying every 5 minutes, like my world. Then shut up and do something. Either take a course, listen to the show, something, right? Or if you're an executive or an HR, change the DNA of your company. And I think a lot of executives and HR people don't want to do it, or they don't know how to do it, or the worst part is they don't know how to lead. Any idiot can lead on a spreadsheet, and any idiot can get on his knees in front of his board or her board. But when you have to lead your people, and I mean from you all the way down to the last hire, that's a leader. And a lot of these guys don't know how to lead because they were put into something or thrusted into something and they have no clue of how to get from A to Z. And I think that's a big thing.
Do you feel like humility is an important quality for a leader to have? I mean, from your perspective.
All day. When I screw up, I will tell people I'm an effing idiot. Right. And I've had my team come in and see me swearing at my laptop. And they're like, who are you mad at? I'm like, my laptop and I are having a fight. And they just look at me like, seriously? I'm like, yes, we're having a fight. Leave us alone. Well, I'll let you know when we're done. Yeah. And they just like, okay. And if I screw up, it's like, I screwed up. We're good. Like it's no big deal. And if I make fun of somebody, I also make fun of me.
Right.
Like if I'm like so-and-so, oh my God, I'm like, but you gotta, it's the old Don Rickles thing. If you do it out of love or like, people are okay with it. If you do it because you're just trying to be an ass, they're not. So every company, I joke around, I do whatever, have my humility, but at the end of the day, they know, one, they can come to me, which is the most important thing. And two, I have no problem admitting I made a mistake. And three, humility is a great, if someone says you screwed up, I'm like, okay, well, let's go fix it. It's like, not like I'm the boss. I would never screw up. Yeah, you screw up enough. We're good. So, and I think that's the problem. I think everybody thinks they get to a certain level and like, they're perfect. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, we discussed this before, didn't we, gentlemen? But, and Steve said about, if you're not happy with the job, leave it. But it's also the same with this. If you're working for a company who can't accept the fact that every now and again you're going to screw something up, and you have a serious ear bending for you think, sorry, I made a mistake, and you own up to it.
Right.
Then you shouldn't work for that company. They don't deserve you.
Right.
If you can say, oh, I made a mistake, and then get bollocked for doing it, you're at the wrong company. They don't deserve you. They do not deserve you to be working there.
Yeah.
And go and find somewhere where people accept you for what you are, see that you've made mistakes, hope that they can help you either not make that mistake again or encourage you to build your own skill set so it doesn't happen again. Yeah, that's a much better way of dealing with it.
People people in the remote, especially people who are aspiring remote workers, they need to ask those questions that you're getting at, which is not just how much money is it and what is the job. Those are the basics, and that's very basic questions. You want to get into what's the culture like? Who am I going to work with? What is the effort that goes into creating a culture? How do you cultivate that? What are your values? And people should be able to answer that in a healthy remote organization, or any organization. They should be able to answer about the culture of the organization. And I go back to the importance of that for remote organizations, because it's even more obvious. The disparities are even more obvious when you have a good versus a negative culture.
Right. But a lot of people don't know what to ask. Some of it's their first job out of university,
True.
sometimes
Okay.
out of high school. Sometimes it's a working mom or dad, stay-at-home mom or dad that's going back, that hasn't been in the workplace for 100 years, right? So they kind of forgot. They're a little rusty. So I think a lot of it is common sense, also listening to this show. But I'm just saying, at the end of the day, I think a lot of it you just learn. But I really believe that you can shine. And if that organization doesn't appreciate you, then get out.
That's right.
There's
Yeah.
there's other
But it
companies,
should be.
but
It should also be something, and again, that Michael touched on. It also should be something which is part of your onboarding.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
okay. Where you have a culture in this company where it's okay. That if things go wrong, then you come and either go and see your somebody who's mentoring you in the job, or
That's
you
right.
go to your line manager or whatever. That should be an easy path. You should not need them as sort of this intellectual machete to cut your way through a whole load of crap, and then
Right.
be expected to get on your knees and beg for forgiveness. Go somewhere else. They don't deserve you to work
I
there.
mean, people, just like employers have the power to cut you, employees have the power to move on. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really important point that we need to emphasize. Is that's actually, I think that's an important function, an important part of the market, the free market economy, is that employees can say no to organizations that are not deserving of their effort. Because why, in the ecosystem of a good economy, do you want to have bad organizations survive?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we're in a good economy anymore, and everybody's laying people off. So, but they still need good people.
You still need people, yeah.
And
Actually,
I think that's a big
they're
thing.
leaning on the good people even more now. I mean, I read an
Yeah.
article on how the people who are at the companies now, who've survived those cuts, are being asked to do more in ways, which happens at every cycle,
Right.
doesn't it?
Well, and it's funny because when Elon did it at Twitter, everybody was like, I'm like, oh, grow up. You still have a job. Stop being a bunch of little pansy pussies. What? Now you have to actually work for your money? Stop it. So I don't agree with some of what he does, 99.9%. But you got rid of who you thought was dead wood. You kept people that believe in your mission, whatever that is. I'm not really sure. And it's like, okay, now what? So if you stay, you stay. You shut up, do your job, and then when you're asked to interject, you interject, right? Or you come up with great ideas and you present to him,
Right.
or however they work at Twitter or don't work at Twitter. But and I sort of like when they would all be like, "Oh, this is terrible, and we're going to do this," and I'm like, "Then just leave." I mean, everyone else is going to get laid off and fired in the next 6 months from the tech world. Then leave. Don't have a job. Get unemployment. Get $200 a week instead of 150 or 200 or 300,000 a year that you're making, and figure out how you're going to pay for your car.
Right.
So I think people forget that. It's like it's not a right that you have a job. It's a privilege, and for that privilege, you have to work. It's not like you're giving it because you're entitled. No, you have to earn it. You have to earn everything you do. And I think employees forget that. And I also think companies forget that it's a privilege to have the employee. It's a two-way street.
Two-way street.
And I think they both need to be retrained and rethought on how to think that way so they can go to that next step and grow each other.
Well, I'd like, we can, I know we're getting on our typical time here, but I'll end on this note, or bring us closing on this note, is you're getting this idea of a two-way privilege is actually getting at having a sense of gratitude for the people that you're working with, having a sense of gratitude for the economy that we're in. So even how I know that things are not great for a lot of people, but they're still better than they were 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and I think people in modern times have forgotten how good things are, and how that from a place of gratitude, you can actually launch even higher than if you're coming from a place of taking things for granted.
Correct. And that goes for companies and employers.
That's right.
It's a privilege to have the employee, and for the employee, it's a privilege to be at the company. And if they would meet in the middle with that, things would go much smoother. And we make that very clear to our people. It's like, listen, we're very honored to have you, and you should be honored that we want you.
Yeah.
And now how do we grow? And that's how it works.
And then you focus on, you can get down to work, when you have that foundation. So
yep. And that's what every company needs, a good foundation.
Gentlemen, as ever, it's a privilege to be on the show with you.
Because we're here. Crazy talk. Of course, it's a privilege. That's that modesty we were talking about earlier. Michael, always a pleasure. We'll see you next Friday. Of course, Michael has a new show every Friday. If I don't screw up, it'll be on YouTube today. If not, it'll definitely be on the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like it. If you're into remote work, thinking about remote work, or want to know anything about work, you can listen to the show. And also, you can take Michael's course, which is down below, which you can't see, but you will see it when we do this. And if you mention Too Old Farts, you get a 10% discount. So that's pretty cool. Michael also does one-on-one, and so do David and I, but it's a different one-on-one for another time. Enjoy, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Well, sadly, this is the end of today's show. A really big thank you to everyone who contributed today to the show. And of course, thank you to my co-host, Stephen Oldfart. I'm David Oldfart. Don't forget, subscribe to the show and get all the latest updates from Two Old Farts Making Noises.